Think about it. The cities we live in, they aren't just random collections of buildings, are they?
No, not at all. They're really shaped by intentional ideas, by visions of how life should be lived.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And today we're doing a deep dive into a really influential one,
Hmm.
the idea of the Romantic City, as conceived by the architect Bertram Goodhue.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because, well, we hear a lot about the big names in modern architecture, right?
Hmm.
But Goodhue, I mean, he designed some incredibly recognizable landmarks. Think Nebraska State Capitol or the Los Angeles Central Library.
Huge projects.
Huge. But he still tends to be maybe a bit of an unsung hero in the grand narrative of architectural history.
That's so true. So our goal here, it isn't just a standard biography.
Right.
We want to explore his, well, somewhat anti-modern, maybe even anti-urban vision,
Mm.
and see how it maybe surprisingly helps shape a lot of the contemporary cities we know.
Especially those sort of charming, picturesque environments we often seek out.
Yeah, exactly. The book we're digging into, Dream Cities, it suggests that understanding figures like Goodhue gives us tools, really, a way to decode the architecture that's all around us.
And it really brings out this intriguing tendency, doesn't it? As modernity rushes forward, there's often this simultaneous pull backward in time.
But reaching back.
Yeah, a desire for historical echoes. Goodhue's work is such a prime example of that. And you can still see that kind of yearning for, I don't know, historical recreation in cities today.
Okay, so to really get into this, let's maybe start with the man himself.
Right.
Bertram Goodhue lived 1869 to 1924.
And his early training was with James Renwick Jr., pretty significant name there, too.
Right. And he developed this real appreciation early on for architectural styles like medieval and Spanish colonial.
What's particularly interesting even back then was his skill, his exceptional skill at drawing these elaborate dream cities, just pen ink. Yeah, he had this portfolio from like 1896, and it already showcased these very romantic, historically inspired designs. It really laid the groundwork for where he was headed.
And you have to remember the context, right? This is the late 19th century.
Exactly. Industrial, urban modernity is really kicking into high gear.
And that rapid growth, the industrialization, the urbanization, it sparked this desire in a lot of people for alternatives. They saw the downsides of city life.
Definitely. I mean, you saw the emergence of all sorts of things, utopian communities, planned towns.
The Garden City movement.
The garden cities, yeah. All attempts to kind of create a better way of living away from the perceived, problems and grime of the industrial city.
And if you zoom out a bit, culturally, there's that strong influence of Romanticism hanging over this whole period, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. A real longing to escape what people saw as the harshness, the pollution of the industrial city, and find refuge in these, well, idealized, almost pseudo-rural places.
So Goodhue, he definitely swam against the current of modernism.
He did. It seems like a conscious choice, really, to reject those modern architectural trends and instead embrace traditional forms, traditional symbols.
It's almost like he found this personal way to sort of push back against the modern world while still, being a very active participant in it professionally.
And what's fascinating is how that personal rejection translates directly into the characteristics of his romantic city designs. You look at his work, and there's a very clear pattern that emerges.
Okay, yeah, let's break that down. What are some key features?
Well, one of the most obvious is his avoidance of urban density. He clearly preferred lower density settings, more picturesque, visually appealing environments.
Right, thinking winding streets, lots of natural landscaping.
Exactly, which kind of ironically often led to communities that were pretty car dependent even back then.
Huh. And the styles.
He frequently drew on historical styles. Spanish colonial revival and Gothic were big ones for him.
Yeah.
And the goal was often to create these quite self-contained communities, sometimes even gated, offering what he apparently called an illusion of isolation and suburban privacy.
You really get a sense of that desire for separation, don't you, when you hear about Goodhue's own home, this little wooden castle he built in Wall
Oh, the castle. Yeah, it supposedly had a moat, a drawbridge.
and fired a cannon every night. Is that right?
Apparently, like his own little miniature romantic escape pod from the world.
It's so theatrical.
And the contrast they talk about between his life there at the castle and his professional life in the city, it was apparently quite stark.
How so?
Well, one account suggests he'd undergo this noticeable transformation, physically, mentally, shifting between these two personas. It really points to this deliberate separation he maintained.
Between his private, romantic ideals and the practical demands of his work.
Precisely.
His travels must have played a big part, too. You mentioned Spanish colonial, his trips through the American Southwest.
Oh, absolutely crucial. He was apparently deeply captivated by the history, the architecture he saw there. And that really fueled his passion for the Spanish colonial revival style.
And you can see that passion directly influencing some of his most significant projects, right?
Definitely. Take Balboa Park in San Diego. That wasn't just designed as a park. It played a fundamental role in shaping San Diego's whole identity as this, romantic, almost dreamlike escape.
Yeah, it really defines the feeling of that part of the city.
Or think about El Furades in Montecito, that estate,
Right.
with its mix of Roman and Persian influences. It's like stepping directly into the owner's very specific romantic interests, a physical manifestation of those tastes.
And then there's Caltech, the California Institute of Technology campus.
Ah, Caltech. Now here's where it gets really interesting, doesn't it?
Yeah, because you've got this leading-edge institution, all about modern science.
Right, pushing the boundaries of knowledge.
And he designs its home in this Mediterranean-style, almost Baroque aesthetic. It seems like such a contradiction.
It does, but then you look closer.
At the details, like those column capitals.
Exactly. In the arcades, you look up at the capitals, and they're not just decorative swirls, they're actual sculptures of scientists with their tools.
Oh, yeah, I've seen pictures. Like a chemist with a beaker.
An engineer with an airplane engine, a
Yeah.
musician with an instrument, all depicted with these really joyful expressions. It's almost like something you'd find on a medieval cathedral, but celebrating modern pursuits.
Full of that characteristic Goodhue wit, you could say.
Absolutely. And this historically themed approach, it even pops up in really unexpected places, like the Samson Tire and Rubber Plant in Los Angeles.
That's tire factory.
A massive industrial facility
Yeah.
designed to look like a 7th century BCE Assyrian castle.
Get out.
Really?
Seriously.
Great.
Complete with concrete griffins guarding the entrance. It just underscores how committed he was to this vision, even for something as utilitarian as manufacturing.
Wow. So this whole romantic city ideal, this vision of making the city feel more like the countryside, essentially.
It led to the development of what the book calls these suburb cities, especially in Southern California.
That's a good way to put it. Cities built on the very idea of not feeling like a city, characterized by detached houses, spreading out, a real lack of verticality.
But that whole impulse, though, leaving the city behind thing, it had real social consequences, didn't it?
Oh, definitely. Significant ones. On one hand, it could lead to isolation for those who moved out to these more spread out environments.
Less spontaneous interaction.
And on the other hand, it placed this increased burden on the resources and infrastructure of the communities they were leaving, the older urban cores, which still had to somehow support these expanding suburbs.
That's a really crucial point, because the dream of this, quote, better life, it became more accessible mainly to the middle classes, right? Those who could actually afford to relocate.
Exactly. Which potentially led to, increased marginalization or neglect for those left behind with fewer resources.
So Goodhue's later work, particularly in that Spanish colonial style, it really cemented his influence, didn't it?
It really did. He essentially created the prototypes, the models, for what became the Spanish colonial revival movement in California.
Which then spread.
Yeah, it spread to other areas known for that style, like Santa Barbara, even Palm Beach in Florida. It fundamentally shaped the architectural character of those places.
And it wasn't just about building entirely new cities from scratch. You can see echoes of this romantic city idea elsewhere, too.
For sure. Think about the specific Spanish colonial revival districts you find across California and Florida.
Okay.
But also think about some of the early railroad or trolley suburbs that popped up around eastern and midwestern cities in the late 19th, early 20th century.
How so? What connects them?
Well, often you see similar characteristics.
Right.
The curving streets instead of a grid, extensive landscaping, maybe developments that were a bit too spread out for easy walking, making them quite reliant on that streetcar, or later, the automobile.
Right, that picturesque, less dense feeling again.
And sometimes these areas incorporated elements of controlled access, too, maybe using green belts or parks as buffers, or sometimes even actual gates. It further reinforced that sense of separation, maybe exclusivity.
So when we pull all this together, what's the big takeaway from looking at Goodhue's work?
I think it's this really interesting, almost paradoxical integration of anti-modern ideals right into the fabric of modern urban life.
Paradoxical because he was using historical styles to shape the future city.
Exactly. He wasn't just designing individual buildings, though he did that brilliantly. He was shaping entire environments, whole feelings of place, based on this deep-seated longing for, well, romantic, maybe even escapist spaces.
And the idea is once you grasp that vision, Goodhue's romantic city, you start to recognize its influence all over the place.
You really do. And so many different forms of urban and suburban development that we see today, it's like gaining a new lens, doesn't it? A new way to understand the built environment around you.
Yeah, it really clicks. Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. How does this underlying desire, this urge to escape the perceived problems of the modern city, how does that continue to influence the way our built environment is being shaped right now, today?
That's the question, isn't it? What are the modern equivalents of Goodhue's castles? Maybe they're not literal castles with moats anymore.
Right, but what forms do they take?
Yeah.
It makes you consider the constant tension we all navigate, doesn't it? Between wanting those vibrant urban connections, the energy of the city, and that persistent allure of private, seemingly separate, maybe safer spaces.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the dreams, the often invisible dreams that are shaping our cities today, perhaps in ways we don't even fully realize. Something to chew on.